Sometimes the loneliest seat in the room is the one that reveals who people truly are. The ballroom of the Grand Aurora Hotel shimmered like a palace carved from light. Crystal chandeliers hung from the 40-foot ceiling like frozen waterfalls, scattering gold reflections across polished marble floors. A string quartet played softly near the stage while servers in white gloves floated between tables carrying champagne worth more than Claire Bennett spent on groceries in a month. Every inch of the room smelled of roses, expensive perfume, and polished silver. And right in the middle of all that beauty, Claire stood completely alone. "Ma'am, I'm sorry," the wedding coordinator whispered tightly, avoiding eye contact. "There's been a seating adjustment." Claire looked down at the small cream-colored place card in the woman's trembling hand. Table 37. Her stomach dropped. She glanced across the ballroom toward the glowing center tables packed with laughing relatives dressed in diamonds and tailored tuxedos. Table 37 sat near the service hallway beside the kitchen doors, hidden behind a giant marble pillar where nobody important would have to see her. Beside her, 8-year-old Lily tightened her grip on Claire's hand. "Mom," she asked softly, her little blue eyes full of confusion, "did we do something wrong?" Claire forced a smile that hurt to hold together. "No, sweetheart," she whispered. "Sometimes grown-ups just make mistakes." But deep down, she knew this was no mistake. Vanessa Hale had always been careful with appearances. And Claire, a struggling single mother in a navy dress she had stitched herself at the kitchen table 3 nights earlier, did not fit the image of tonight's $1 million wedding. Claire swallowed hard and guided Lily toward the isolated table while conversations around them lowered into quiet whispers. She could feel the stares brushing against her skin like cold rain. Her cousin Brandon leaned toward another guest, not bothering to lower his voice enough. "I told Vanessa inviting Claire was risky," he muttered with a smirk. "This isn't exactly a charity banquet." A few people laughed softly. Claire kept walking. Her heels clicked against the marble with careful dignity, even as shame burned hot beneath her skin. Lily climbed into the chair beside her, legs dangling inches above the floor. The little girl looked around at the glowing ballroom with wonder instead of bitterness. Children still believed beauty belonged to everyone. Claire wished adults did too. At the far end of the room, Vanessa stood beneath an arch of white orchids posing for photographs in a custom silk gown that probably cost more than Claire's car. The bride's eyes flickered toward table 37 for only a second before she turned away, as though she had spotted something unpleasant on the floor. Claire lowered her gaze quickly, pretending not to notice. She reached into her purse and smoothed the edges of the folded envelope she had brought as a wedding gift. Inside was $50, half her paycheck from the diner. Money she could not afford to spend. But her grandmother had once told her, "Class is how you treat people when you have every reason not to." Claire still believed that. Even now, even here. Lily leaned closer. "Mom," she whispered carefully, "are we really supposed to sit back here?" Claire opened her mouth to answer, but before the words could come, a deep, calm voice appeared behind them. "No," the man said quietly. "They are." Claire turned slowly. A tall man in a black tuxedo stood beside the table, silver cufflinks glinting beneath the chandelier light. His expression was unreadable, but his dark eyes were fixed on the empty seats surrounding Claire like he understood exactly what they meant. Then, without asking permission from anyone in the room, he pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. For a moment, nobody in the ballroom moved. The music still floated softly beneath the chandeliers. Glasses still clinked against polished tables, but something invisible had shifted in the room. The man sitting across from Claire Bennett did not belong at table 37. People like him belonged beneath the center lights, beside governors and investors and women wrapped in diamonds. Yet there he sat calmly in front of a single mother and her little girl near the kitchen hallway as though it was the most natural thing in the world. Claire straightened carefully in her chair, unsure whether to speak first or apologize for existing near him. Up close, the stranger looked even more out of place among the shadows of the forgotten table. His tuxedo was perfectly fitted, black silk against broad shoulders, his silver watch catching flashes of chandelier light every time he moved his hand. But it was not wealth that unsettled her. It was composure. The man carried himself with the quiet stillness of someone used to being listened to the second he entered a room. Lily stared at him openly, her small fingers curled around the cloth napkin in her lap. "Hi," she said softly. The man smiled immediately, and the cold distance in his face softened. "Hello there." His voice was warm now, almost gentle. "I am Ethan." Lily glanced at Claire for permission before answering. "I am Lily." Ethan nodded seriously, like he had just been introduced to someone important. "That is a beautiful name." Claire finally found her voice. "You really do not have to sit here," she said quietly. "I think people might be expecting you somewhere else." Ethan looked around the nearly empty table, then toward the glittering center of the ballroom, where laughter rose beneath crystal lights, like a performance rehearsed too many times. "I am exactly where I want to be," he replied. The answer landed harder than Claire expected. She looked down quickly, pretending to adjust the sleeve of her dress. The fabric near her wrist was beginning to fray. She hoped he had not noticed. Across the ballroom, Vanessa Hale suddenly stiffened during a photograph. Even from 30 feet away, Claire could see panic flicker behind the bride's polished smile. Vanessa whispered something urgently to Brandon, who turned toward table 37 so fast he nearly spilled his champagne. His expression twisted with confusion. "Who is that guy?" one guest murmured nearby. "I do not know," another whispered back. "But look at the staff." Claire followed their gaze. Several hotel employees had gone visibly rigid the moment Ethan sat down. One server nearly dropped a tray of wineglasses before catching it at the last second. Near the entrance, the wedding manager whispered frantically into an earpiece while staring toward Ethan like a man watching a thunderstorm roll across open water. Ethan seemed completely unaware of the tension spreading around him. Or perhaps he simply did not care. He picked up the dinner menu and slid it toward Lily. "Have you decided what looks best?" Lily studied the gold-embossed menu with wide eyes. "I do not know how to say half these words." Ethan leaned closer conspiratorially. "Neither do I." Lily giggled softly, and the sound cut through the ballroom like sunlight through clouds. Claire felt something painful tighten in her chest. She had not heard her daughter laugh like that in weeks. Bills, double shifts, overdue rent notices, and endless exhaustion had drained the brightness from both their lives little by little. But right now, for the first time all evening, Lily looked like a child again instead of a little girl learning too early how cruel adults could be. Ethan noticed Claire watching them. "You raised a kind daughter," he said quietly. Claire blinked, caught off guard by the sincerity in his tone. Most people noticed her old dress first, or the fact she arrived alone, or the carefully hidden weariness beneath her smile. Very few people noticed Lily. Very few people noticed anything that mattered. Before Claire could answer, the microphone near the stage crackled softly. The wedding MC adjusted his tie and smiled nervously toward the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice suddenly tighter than before, "we would like to officially welcome one of our distinguished guests this evening." Claire saw Vanessa's face go pale, and then the MC turned directly toward table 37. The ballroom fell into a silence so complete that even the soft violin music seemed afraid to continue. Hundreds of eyes turned toward table 37. Claire felt her heartbeat stumble against her ribs as the MC forced a smile beneath the chandelier lights. "We are honored tonight," he announced carefully, "to welcome the founder and chairman of Callaway Capital Partners, Mr. Ethan Callaway." A wave of whispers swept through the room like wind moving across water. Claire stared at the man sitting across from her, suddenly unable to breathe properly. Even she knew the name. Everyone in America knew the name. Ethan Callaway was the billionaire behind some of the largest hotel and real estate acquisitions in the country. Financial magazines called him the ghost investor because he almost never attended public events unless billions of dollars were involved. Yet somehow, impossibly, he was sitting beside her daughter at the forgotten table near the kitchen hallway. Lily looked between them in confusion. "Mom," she whispered, "is he famous?" Claire opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Ethan gave the little girl a small smile. "Only in very boring magazines." A few nervous laughs rippled through nearby tables, but the tension in the ballroom only deepened. Across the room, Brandon Hale nearly choked on his champagne. Vanessa's face had lost every trace of color beneath her bridal makeup. The bride quickly stepped away from the photographers and hurried toward the stage. Her smile stretched so tightly it looked painful. Claire wished she could disappear into the marble floor. She suddenly became aware of every tiny detail about herself. The worn stitching beneath the sleeve of her dress, the scuffed heel of her shoe, The fact that her purse came from a discount store clearance rack 2 winters ago. She did not belong in Ethan Callaway's orbit. People like him existed in glass towers and private jets and rooms where billion-dollar decisions were made over imported whiskey. People like Claire existed under fluorescent diner lights, counting tip money at 2 in the morning while praying the electricity bill could wait another week. Ethan seemed to sense her panic immediately. "Relax," he said quietly without looking at her. "You are doing better than most people in this room." Claire blinked at him. "I think you are causing a national emergency at my cousin's wedding." The corner of Ethan's mouth lifted slightly. "Good." The answer caught her so off guard that a laugh escaped before she could stop it. It was small and breathless, but real. Ethan noticed. His eyes softened for just a second, and something unreadable passed across his face. Not pity, not amusement, something lonelier. Near the stage, Vanessa finally grabbed the microphone from the MC with trembling fingers. "Everyone," she said brightly, though panic flickered behind her polished voice, "we are absolutely thrilled Mr. Callaway could attend tonight. Ethan has been such an incredible supporter of the Hale development expansion." Ethan calmly lifted his water glass, but did not stand. Vanessa's smile faltered almost immediately. Claire noticed several older businessmen at the center tables exchanging nervous glances. One leaned toward another and whispered something urgently. Suddenly, the entire atmosphere of the wedding shifted. It was no longer about flowers or music or romance. It felt like a room waiting for a verdict. Ethan leaned back in his chair with effortless calm, while Lily studied him with open curiosity. "Do you really own buildings?" she asked. "A few," Ethan admitted. "How many?" "Too many." Lily considered this carefully. "Then why are you sitting back here with us?" The question landed gently, but Claire froze in embarrassment. Ethan looked toward the glowing center of the ballroom, where crystal light reflected off diamonds and polished silver. Then his gaze returned to Claire and Lily. "Because," he said quietly, "sometimes the people at the smallest table are the only real ones in the room." Claire looked down immediately, blinking hard against the sudden sting in her eyes. Nobody had spoken to her like that in years. Not since before the divorce. Not since her husband packed a suitcase, promised he would come back, and disappeared into another state with someone younger and easier and untouched by responsibility. After that came the silence. The bills. The second jobs. The invitations that slowly stopped coming. Claire learned very quickly that loneliness was not loud. It was quiet. It looked like empty chairs at family holidays and unanswered messages and pretending not to notice when people stopped saving you a seat. And somehow, tonight, a billionaire she had never met before had seen all of it without her saying a single word. The longer Ethan Callaway remained at table 37, the stranger the ballroom became. Conversations no longer flowed naturally beneath the chandeliers. They broke apart in nervous fragments. Guests who had spent the evening sipping champagne and discussing stock prices now kept glancing toward the forgotten corner near the kitchen hallway like they were watching a fire slowly spread across expensive carpet. Claire could feel it in the air. Curiosity, confusion, panic. The Hale family had spent months preparing tonight's wedding as more than a celebration. It was a performance. A carefully polished display meant to impress investors, executives, and wealthy partners connected to the family's luxury development business. Every flower arrangement, every violin note, every gold-rimmed dinner plate existed for one purpose: status. And now the most important man in the room was sitting beside the one person they had tried hardest to hide. Vanessa descended from the stage with perfect posture and a smile so bright it looked painful. Her white silk gown swept across the marble floor like flowing water as photographers rushed after her. "Ethan," she said sweetly the moment she reached the table, "we are all so honored you could make it tonight." Ethan looked up calmly. "Congratulations on the wedding." Vanessa's smile twitched slightly. She glanced at Claire for only a fraction of a second before turning back to him. "We actually reserved a private table for you near the family section. I am sure there has been some kind of misunderstanding." Claire immediately started reaching for her purse. "It is okay," she said quietly. "We can move." But Ethan did not even look at her. "No," he replied simply. "You are seated exactly where you belong." The words hit the table like a dropped glass. Vanessa blinked. For the first time all evening, the polished confidence behind her smile cracked just enough for something uglier to show through. "Of course," she said lightly, though her voice had tightened. I just thought perhaps you would prefer more privacy. Ethan folded his hands calmly. I prefer honesty. Silence. Heavy and immediate. Nearby guests pretended not to stare while staring anyway. Claire wished the violin music would grow louder. She wished the chandeliers would dim. She wished she had stayed home in her tiny apartment eating microwave macaroni with Lily while watching old movies beneath a thrift store blanket. Anything would feel easier than this. Vanessa's gaze shifted toward Claire again, colder now. Claire, she said carefully, would you mind helping one of the coordinators in the hallway for a moment? Claire recognized the tone immediately. It was the same voice Vanessa used years ago when they were teenagers, and Claire showed up to a family Christmas wearing discount store shoes. Sweet enough for strangers to admire. Sharp enough to leave bruises nobody else could see. Claire slowly pushed her chair back. Mom, Lily whispered nervously. Ethan finally spoke before Claire could stand. She is staying. Vanessa froze. Around them, several businessmen at neighboring tables exchanged deeply uncomfortable glances. One older investor quietly set down his wine glass and leaned back like he suddenly understood the room had become dangerous territory. Vanessa forced out a laugh that sounded brittle. You really are full of surprises tonight. Ethan's expression never changed. So are some families. Claire looked down quickly, pretending to smooth the wrinkles in her napkin while heat rushed into her cheeks. Nobody had defended her like this before. Not publicly. Not ever. Most people avoided uncomfortable moments. Ethan Calloway seemed to walk directly into them without fear. Across the ballroom, Brandon hurried toward the table, adjusting his tuxedo jacket with visible nerves. Sweat gleamed near his hairline despite the cold air conditioning. Mr. Calloway, he said quickly, forcing enthusiasm into his voice. I wanted to personally thank you again for attending tonight. The Hale Group is incredibly excited about future opportunities with Calloway Capital. Ethan looked at him for a long moment before answering. Are you? Brandon's smile faltered instantly. The question sounded harmless, but something beneath it made the surrounding air feel colder. Claire noticed Lily quietly sliding her small hand into Ethan's sleeve. You make everybody nervous, the little girl whispered. Ethan glanced down at her and, for the first time that evening, actually laughed. It was not loud. It was soft and rough around the edges like a sound he had not used in a very long time. That, he admitted quietly, might be true. The tension inside the ballroom thickened minute by minute, settling over the tables like invisible smoke. The violin quartet continued playing near the stage, but now every elegant note sounded strained beneath the weight of whispered conversations and nervous glances. Nobody cared about the wedding cake anymore. Nobody cared about the flowers imported from Paris or the 7-layer champagne tower glowing beneath crystal lights. The center of attention had quietly shifted to the forgotten table near the kitchen hallway where a billionaire sat beside a single mother everyone else had tried to erase. Claire could feel the pressure building around them from every direction. Guests who had ignored her an hour earlier now studied her carefully, trying to understand what they had missed. But Claire still felt like the same exhausted woman who folded diner aprons at midnight and clipped grocery coupons at her kitchen counter while Lily slept on the couch beside her. Ethan Calloway's presence did not magically change the overdue bills waiting inside her apartment mailbox tomorrow morning. It did not erase the years of humiliation. It only made everyone else suddenly notice them. And somehow, that felt even more terrifying. A server approached the table carrying silver plates balanced carefully on a tray. His hands visibly shook as he placed dinner in front of Ethan first. Expensive steak, roasted vegetables glazed in butter, wine reduction sauce that smelled rich enough to belong in another world. Then the server hesitated when he reached Claire and Lily. His expression tightened awkwardly. I am terribly sorry, he stammered. There seems to be an issue with your meal order. Claire immediately straightened. That is okay, she said quickly. We can share something simple. She already knew what had happened. Someone had removed their dinner selection when the seating changed. Another quiet reminder that they were never truly expected to stay. Lily lowered her eyes toward the empty tablecloth. Claire recognized that look instantly. The careful little expression children wear when they are trying not to feel embarrassed in public. Ethan slowly set down his fork. What exactly is the issue? He asked calmly. The server swallowed hard. The kitchen was told these seats were no longer active guests. Silence. Nearby conversations stopped completely. Claire felt heat rush into her face so fast it almost hurt. Somewhere across the ballroom, she saw Brandon suddenly become very interested in his champagne glass. Ethan looked at the empty place settings in front of Claire and Lily. Then he turned his gaze toward the head wedding coordinator standing near the stage. "Please come here," he said. His voice was quiet. That somehow made it worse. The coordinator hurried over immediately, pale beneath the ballroom lights. "Mr. Calloway," she began nervously, "there has simply been some confusion regarding seating adjustments." Ethan did not blink. A child was removed from the dinner list at a wedding. The woman's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Ethan leaned back slowly in his chair. Interesting choice. Around them, the silence became unbearable. Claire wanted to disappear. She wanted Ethan to stop defending her because every second of kindness only exposed how cruel everyone else had been. Vanessa finally rushed toward the table again, pearls flashing at her throat. "This is ridiculous," she said sharply under her breath. "Claire, why are you making this into a scene?" Claire stared at her in disbelief. "I did not do anything." Vanessa forced a tight smile for nearby guests while anger burned behind her eyes. "You always do this. You make people uncomfortable and then act innocent." The words landed like ice water. For one terrible second, Claire was 16 years old again, standing at family parties in secondhand dresses while cousins whispered about her mother's unpaid debts. Some wounds never truly left. They only learned how to stay quiet until the perfect moment to hurt again. Ethan rose from his chair slowly. The entire ballroom seemed to straighten with him. He was not loud. He did not raise his voice. But suddenly, every person in the room understood something important. Power did not always need volume. "No," Ethan said calmly, looking directly at Vanessa. "What makes people uncomfortable is cruelty dressed up as class." Nobody moved. Nobody even reached for their wine glass. Ethan glanced down at Lily, whose small hands rested silently in her lap. A little girl should never have to wonder why adults are ashamed to let her sit at their table. Vanessa's face drained completely white. Claire felt her throat tighten painfully as Lily looked down quickly, pretending she had not heard. Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and removed a black business card trimmed with silver lettering. He placed it gently on the table between Vanessa and Brandon. "The Hale expansion proposal was scheduled for final review Monday morning," he said quietly. "It will not be moving forward." The words hit harder than shouting ever could. Somewhere near the stage, a champagne glass slipped from somebody's hand and shattered against the marble floor. The sound of shattered glass echoed across the ballroom like a gunshot. Every conversation died instantly. A server rushed forward with a towel while guests stared in stunned silence at Ethan Calloway standing beside table 37 with calm, terrifying composure. Vanessa looked like she had forgotten how to breathe. Brandon's face had turned the color of wet paper. Around the room, investors and executives exchanged careful glances, each silently calculating what the loss of Calloway capital might mean for the Hale family empire. Claire sat frozen in her chair, unable to fully understand what had just happened. One sentence from Ethan had done more damage than any argument ever could. The Hale expansion deal was the future of the family business. Everyone knew it. The luxury waterfront project had been advertised for months in financial magazines and real estate journals. Without Ethan's backing, the entire development could collapse before construction even began. Vanessa recovered first, or at least she tried to. "Ethan," she said carefully, lowering her voice, "surely this is unnecessary. We can resolve a misunderstanding without making emotional business decisions." Ethan looked at her quietly for several seconds before answering. "You think this is emotional?" His tone remained soft, controlled. Somehow that made the room feel even colder. Vanessa forced a brittle smile. Claire has always been sensitive. The family simply wanted tonight to run smoothly. Claire felt those words hit like tiny knives under the ribs. Always sensitive. That was how people described someone after hurting them long enough. Ethan slowly turned toward Claire. "Did you know they removed your daughter from the dinner list?" Claire swallowed hard. "I assumed there was some confusion." Ethan nodded once, almost sadly. "That is what kind people do," he said. "They search for innocent explanations to excuse cruel behavior." The ballroom fell silent again. Nobody defended Vanessa this time. Nobody laughed politely. Nobody moved. Even the violinists near the stage had lowered their instruments. Lily leaned closer to Claire, small fingers gripping her mother's sleeve. "Mom," she whispered carefully, "are we in trouble?" Claire immediately brushed a strand of blonde hair behind her daughter's ear. "No, sweetheart." But her voice shook slightly. Ethan noticed. He always noticed. That was becoming clear now. The billionaire looked toward Lily with surprising gentleness. "You did absolutely nothing wrong tonight." Lily studied him for a second before asking the question nobody else in the room dared to say out loud. "Then why are they acting mean?" A few guests visibly looked away in embarrassment. Truth always sounded sharper when spoken by a child. Vanessa stepped forward quickly. "This has become inappropriate," she snapped under her breath. "Claire, please take your daughter and go home." Claire's chest tightened instantly. There it was. The final humiliation. Not hidden anymore. Not whispered behind folded napkins or disguised beneath fake smiles. Public rejection beneath crystal chandeliers, while half the city's wealthy elite watched from gold-trimmed tables. Claire slowly reached for her purse. Her fingers trembled despite every effort to stay calm. She would not cry here. She would not give them that memory to carry forever. But before she could stand, Ethan reached down and gently took the purse from her hands. "Sit," he said quietly. Claire stared at him in surprise. "Ethan?" "No," he replied softly. "You have spent enough years leaving rooms to make other people comfortable." The words landed deep inside her chest, because somehow he was right. After the divorce, Claire had become an expert at disappearing. She stopped attending family gatherings after overhearing relatives whisper about her financial problems. She stopped calling friends after too many invitations slowly disappeared. She learned to shrink herself smaller and smaller until people barely noticed she was gone. Survival sometimes looked a lot like invisibility. Ethan turned toward the ballroom slowly, his gaze sweeping across the glittering room. "Interesting thing about power," he said calmly. "It reveals character much faster than money does." Nobody interrupted him. Nobody dared. Ethan looked back toward Vanessa and Brandon. "Tonight, I watched a family spend over $200,000 on flowers, imported wine, and ice sculptures." His eyes lowered briefly toward Lily. But somehow there was no room at the table for a little girl. Vanessa's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Ethan stepped aside then and held out his hand toward Claire with quiet certainty. "Come with me," he said. Claire blinked in confusion. "Where?" For the first time all evening, a faint smile touched Ethan's face. "To the table you should have been sitting at from the beginning." Claire stared at Ethan's outstretched hand as though it belonged to another world entirely. Around them, the ballroom remained frozen beneath the crystal chandeliers, every wealthy guest trapped between curiosity and disbelief. Nobody had ever spoken to the Hale family this way before. Nobody had ever challenged them publicly, especially not at their own wedding. Yet Ethan Calloway stood there with effortless calm, waiting patiently beside the forgotten table near the kitchen hallway like the decision had already been made. Claire looked down at Lily first. Her daughter's wide blue eyes reflected both fear and hope. The fragile kind children carried before life taught them disappointment too many times. Slowly, carefully, Claire placed her trembling hand into Ethan's. His grip was warm and steady, not possessive, protective. The moment he helped her stand, whispers erupted across the ballroom like sparks catching dry paper. Guests leaned toward each other beneath the golden chandelier light. Phones quietly appeared beneath tables. Somewhere near the stage, one of the photographers instinctively lifted his camera before lowering it again after receiving a sharp glare from Vanessa. Ethan ignored all of it. He glanced toward Lily and held out his other hand without hesitation. "Come on, kiddo." Lily looked at Claire for permission before slipping her tiny fingers into Ethan's hand. The image alone was enough to leave half the room speechless. Together, the three of them began walking across the ballroom floor. Claire felt every eye following her. The polished marble beneath her heels suddenly seemed too bright, too exposed, like she had stepped into the center of a spotlight she never asked for. She kept waiting for someone to stop them, for security to appear, for Vanessa to create another scene. But nobody moved, because power had shifted, and everyone in the room knew it. Ethan guided them directly toward the center section of the ballroom, where the wealthiest investors and executives sat beneath towering white orchids and glowing candles. A server hurried forward instantly, nearly tripping over himself to pull out chairs at the main table. The same staff who had ignored Claire earlier now treated her like royalty. The sudden change made her stomach twist painfully. Ethan noticed immediately. "Do not let it bother you," he said quietly as they sat down. Claire looked at him in confusion. "How can it not?" Ethan loosened one cufflink slightly, his expression unreadable beneath the chandelier light. "Because people who change their respect based on status never had real respect to begin with." The words settled deep inside her chest. Nearby executives attempted nervous smiles while pretending not to stare. One older woman wearing emerald earrings leaned toward Claire carefully. "Your daughter is adorable," she said. Earlier, that same woman had looked directly through them like ghosts. Claire thanked her politely anyway because dignity was the only thing life had never successfully taken from her. Across the ballroom, Vanessa stood rigid beside Brandon near the stage. Her expensive bridal makeup could no longer fully hide the panic in her face. Brandon whispered furiously into his phone while glancing toward Ethan every few seconds. Claire suddenly understood something important. Tonight was never just a wedding. It was a business performance balanced on appearances, reputation, and powerful alliances. And Ethan had shattered the illusion simply by choosing where to sit. Dinner finally arrived at the table. Real meals this time. Buttered filet mignon. Fresh bread, still warm from the oven. Chocolate mousse topped with delicate curls of shaved white chocolate. Lily stared at the plate in front of her with amazed eyes. "This looks like food from movies," she whispered. Ethan smiled faintly. "Try the mashed potatoes first. Fancy places always get those right." Lily giggled softly before taking a careful bite. The little girl's face lit up instantly. Claire felt emotion tighten unexpectedly in her throat. She had spent years stretching canned soup, skipping meals, and pretending she was not hungry so Lily could have enough. Seeing her daughter laugh freely beneath sparkling chandeliers felt strangely overwhelming. Ethan watched Lily quietly for a moment before turning toward Claire. "You know," he said softly, "most people in this room are pretending." Claire blinked at him. "Pretending what?" Ethan glanced across the glittering ballroom where forced laughter echoed beneath crystal light and expensive smiles hid nervous calculation. "Pretending they are important because they have money." His eyes shifted toward Lily. "But the truly impressive people are usually the ones who stay kind after life gives them every reason not to." Claire looked down immediately, fighting the sudden sting behind her eyes again. Nobody had seen her this clearly in years. Not her struggles, not her exhaustion, not the quiet strength it took to survive humiliation without becoming bitter. Ethan leaned back in his chair then, watching the ballroom calmly while candlelight reflected softly against his silver watch. "Tonight," he said quietly, "they tried to make you feel invisible." His gaze returned to Claire. "I just wanted them to finally see you." The ballroom no longer sounded like a wedding. It sounded like damage control. Beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers and candlelight, wealthy investors whispered urgently behind raised champagne glasses, while members of the Hale family disappeared in and out of private hallways with strained expressions and forced smiles. Every few minutes, another executive quietly checked a phone screen beneath the tablecloth, reading messages that traveled through New York business circles faster than wildfire. Ethan Calloway had not only rejected the Hale expansion project, he had done it publicly, at their own wedding, and everyone understood the consequences. Claire sat beside Lily at the center table, still struggling to accept the surreal turn the night had taken. The same guests who once avoided eye contact now greeted her warmly when they passed. A woman in diamonds complimented her dress. A hedge fund manager asked where Lily attended school. Another investor personally offered Claire sparkling water before the servers could even notice her glass was empty. It all felt unreal. Not because people had suddenly become kind, but because their kindness depended entirely on who was sitting beside her. Ethan remained calm through all of it. He spoke very little. He did not boast or dominate conversations like the other wealthy men in the room. In fact, the more Claire watched him, the stranger he seemed among them. Most powerful people in the ballroom performed importance loudly. Ethan carried his quietly. Lily had already become comfortable beside him. She sat cross-legged in her chair eating chocolate mousse, while asking him deeply serious questions about buildings and airplanes and whether billionaires ever got grounded as children. Ethan answered every question with complete sincerity. "Did you ever get in trouble at school?" Lily asked. Ethan took a sip of water thoughtfully. "Frequently." Lily gasped in delight. Claire smiled before she could stop herself. It had been so long since she laughed naturally that the feeling almost startled her. Ethan noticed again. He always noticed. Across the ballroom, Vanessa finally approached the center table once more. But this time, she was not alone. An older man with silver hair and a tailored charcoal suit walked beside her with visible tension in his face. Claire recognized him immediately. Richard Hale, Vanessa's father, founder of the Hale Group. The man who once told Claire's widowed mother during Thanksgiving dinner that people who struggle financially usually create their own problems. Richard stopped beside Ethan with the careful posture of a man approaching unstable ground. "Mr. Calloway," he said evenly, "perhaps we could discuss this privately." Ethan did not stand. There is nothing private about character. Richard's jaw tightened. Around them, nearby conversations stopped again. Claire wished desperately that the floor would swallow her whole. But Ethan remained perfectly composed beneath the chandelier light. Richard lowered his voice further. "The Hale Project supports hundreds of employees. Families depend on this expansion moving forward." Ethan folded his hands calmly. "Then perhaps the company should have thought about families before humiliating one in public." Silence. Sharp and immediate. Richard looked briefly toward Claire for the first time all evening. Not through her. At her. There was discomfort in his expression now, even regret. But Claire had learned something painful over the years. People often apologized only after consequences arrived. Lily looked up innocently from her dessert. "Mom," she whispered, "why do rich people look scared all the time?" Claire nearly choked on her water. Ethan covered his mouth briefly, hiding what might have been the beginning of another laugh. Richard cleared his throat awkwardly. "Claire," he began carefully, "perhaps there were misunderstandings tonight." Claire stared at him quietly. All her life, powerful people had expected silence from women. Like her. Quiet acceptance. Quiet humiliation. Quiet exits through side doors. But tonight something inside her felt different. Not angry. Just tired. "There was no misunderstanding," Claire said softly. "You knew exactly where you seated us." Richard looked away first. Ethan watched Claire carefully then, and for the first time that evening, she saw unmistakable admiration in his eyes. Not pity. Respect. Real respect. The kind that could not be bought with money or status or ballroom chandeliers. Near the stage, the wedding band slowly began playing again, softer this time. A slow piano melody drifted through the room like falling snow. Ethan glanced toward the dance floor, where couples hesitated uncertainly beneath golden lights. Then he turned back toward Claire. "May I ask you something?" Claire blinked. "What?" Ethan stood slowly and extended his hand once more. "Would you give the room something honest to look at for a change?" For a second, Claire could only stare at Ethan's hand. The ballroom lights reflected softly against his silver watch, while the slow piano melody drifted through the air like falling snow. Around them, conversations faded into silence once more as guests turned toward the center table, waiting to see what would happen next. Claire felt suddenly aware of everything. The old stitching hidden inside her dress sleeve. The years she had spent apologizing for taking up space. The countless rooms where she learned to sit quietly and leave early before anyone could make her feel unwanted. And now, somehow, the most powerful man in the room was asking her to stand beside him in front of everyone. "Mom," Lily whispered with a hopeful smile, "you should go." Claire looked down at her daughter. Lily's blue eyes shined beneath the chandelier light, full of pride instead of embarrassment now. That alone nearly broke Claire's heart. Slowly, she placed her hand into Ethan's. The dance floor fell silent as they stepped beneath the golden lights together. Guests parted instinctively, creating space around them while the piano continued its soft, aching melody. Claire could feel hundreds of eyes watching, but for the first time all evening, she no longer wanted to disappear. Ethan rested one hand gently at her back, while keeping a respectful distance between them. His movements were calm and steady, like a man entirely uninterested in performing for anyone else in the room. "I should warn you," Claire said quietly as they began to move across the marble floor. "I am not very good at this." Ethan's expression softened faintly. "Neither am I." Claire blinked up at him. "You are probably good at everything." Ethan looked toward the glowing chandeliers overhead for a moment before answering. No, his voice carried a strange sadness beneath it now. "I was very good at making money." The honesty in the answer caught her off guard. Around them, the ballroom seemed quieter than ever. Vanessa stood frozen near the stage while Richard Hale remained seated with both hands clasped tightly together, staring down at the untouched champagne in front of him. Nobody knew how to react anymore. The wedding had transformed into something else entirely. Not a celebration of wealth or appearances, but a quiet reckoning unfolding beneath crystal lights. Claire glanced toward Lily sitting safely at the center table eating the last bite of chocolate mousse while swinging her feet happily beneath the chair. Ethan followed her gaze. "She is extraordinary," he said softly. Claire smiled. "She is the reason I survived the last 8 years." Ethan nodded slowly like he understood more than she realized. Children have a way of saving us without knowing it. Claire studied him carefully then. For the first time that night, Ethan Calloway no longer looked intimidating. He looked lonely. Not the loneliness of empty rooms, but the deeper kind that comes from spending too many years surrounded by people who admire wealth more than humanity. "Why did you really sit at our table?" Claire asked quietly. Ethan was silent for several seconds as the piano melody drifted around them. Finally, he answered, "Because I recognized the look on your daughter's face." Claire frowned slightly. Ethan's eyes lowered toward the marble floor. "I had it once too." The words landed softly, but they carried years inside them. Claire suddenly understood. Ethan Calloway knew exactly what it felt like to be overlooked before success taught the world to pretend otherwise. The song neared its end while snow began falling softly outside the towering ballroom windows, white flakes drifting through the Manhattan night like scattered stars. Guests no longer whispered now. They simply watched, some with embarrassment, some with admiration, and a few with the uncomfortable realization that money had not made them better people after all. As the final piano note faded into silence, Ethan released Claire's hand slowly, but did not step away immediately. "You know something funny?" he said quietly. Claire shook her head. Ethan glanced around the ballroom one last time. Tonight they spent millions trying to impress each other. His eyes returned to her. But the only thing anyone will remember tomorrow is how they treated the woman at the smallest table. Claire felt tears sting her eyes again, but this time she did not look away. Outside the windows, snow continued falling over the city lights while warmth from the ballroom glowed softly against the glass. And for the first time in years, Claire Bennett no longer felt invisible.